So we've already learned a lot about food webs. We've learned how to create these diagrams that show us how energy is moving through an ecosystem, all the way from our producers through our consumers, primary, secondary, tertiary, and so forth. How our autotrophs are making that energy, and how our heterotrophs are using it up. Today, we're actually going to talk about two processes that go on behind the scenes with our producers and with our consumers, called photosynthesis and cellular respiration. And we're going to learn that the two are very closely related, but we're going to talk about each one separately. And we're going to start this with photosynthesis. And the word photosynthesis actually has two parts to it. Photo, which means light, and synthesis means to make. So it means to make with light. Photosynthesis is actually we're going to learn is the process by which our producers take energy from the sun and turn it into food, or in this case, sugar is the word we're going to use. So we already know a big part about this process here. We know that all energy that we have on this planet comes from the sun, and it actually comes to us in the form of light energy. So all the energy from the planet, or all the energy that gets to the planet, enters in the form of light energy. The sun's giving us this light, it's radiating to the earth, and that energy, we're going to say, as far as our food chain is concerned, or in this case I've used a pyramid, that energy goes to one place. It goes to our producers, it goes to our plants. Remember that, for example, humans, we can't take in light energy and get a full stomach. The only organism that takes in that light energy here is our producers, our plants. So producers are taking in sunlight, and what they're doing is, through a process called photosynthesis, they're storing the energy in the form of glucose. Glucose is just a fancy word for sugar, but I'll be using that word throughout. So just remember, glucose means sugar, and glucose is a place to store energy. Sugar is used to store energy. So that light energy, that sunlight energy, is going into our plants. And plants are actually taking in two other things that they're going to need for photosynthesis. One is carbon dioxide, and they just get that from the atmosphere around them. Carbon dioxide is in the air, and they're just extracting it out. And water. They're extracting water from the ground through their roots, but they're also going to need that water for photosynthesis. So we're having carbon dioxide and water going into, all three of those things are going into our plant. Light, carbon dioxide, and water. And they actually go to a very special part of the plant, inside the plant cells, called the chloroplast. And this is where photosynthesis happens. Only plants have these chloroplasts, so they're the only ones that can take in these three things: light, carbon dioxide, and water, and undergo photosynthesis. And it also happens to be what makes plants green. So those three things come out, and those three things go in, and two things actually come out. The first is the one that I mentioned, sugar, or glucose, and the other thing is oxygen. And oxygen is just a byproduct of this process, so you can think about it as the plant is taking in the light energy, it's taking in the water, the carbon dioxide, it's reassembling those molecules into sugar, which is where the energy is going to be stored, and oxygen, which is just kind of left over from the process. So there's a glucose molecule, a sugar molecule. You don't need to remember that shape. And then our oxygen molecule here, O2 gas. That's the same oxygen we breathe. So I like to think of photosynthesis like a process. So it's a series of steps that changes inputs to outputs. So I like to think of it like cooking, in that you put in a bunch of ingredients, and say you're making a cake. You put in eggs, flour, or sugar, and you put it in the oven, and out you get a cake. You have inputs and you have outputs. So if we just make a very simple diagram like this, we can look at photosynthesis this way. Our producers, or plants, are taking in three things. They're taking in sunlight, or light energy, carbon dioxide, a CO2 gas, and water, H2O. And what they're doing is they're producing our outputs. They're producing sugar, and they're producing oxygen gas. So three things go in and two things go out. And what's important to remember at this, and I'll point it out again in a few seconds, but remember I said that energy can't be destroyed. So what's happening to that light energy? It's actually getting stored chemically in the sugar, the glucose. And that's why you and I and plants and animals can take in sugar and use it as the source of our energy. That molecule stores or holds energy. And then you can also see the parts here, the CO2 and the H2O. Well, what happens to that matter? Well, carbon you can see is over here in the sugar, the hydrogen over here in the sugar, the oxygen over here in the sugar, and there's some oxygen left over from the process. So all that matter that goes in is also coming out. It's just being rearranged, and it's the energy and the storing of energy that allows the plants to do that. You might see a question on a test that looks something like this. So just to keep you aware of it, always know those inputs and outputs. So photosynthesis is a process that changes light energy, carbon dioxide, and water into sugar and oxygen. So those inputs and outputs, you can see it here written out. Light, water, carbon dioxide become or turn into sugar and oxygen. And then you might also see it presented like this in words: carbon dioxide and water with light become cellular food, that's sugar and oxygen. And you might see it this way, but I will never present it to you this way. But this is the chemical equation. Carbon dioxide gas over here, water over here. Here's your sugar, and here's your oxygen. So that's kind of photosynthesis in a short, brief description. That sunlight energy going to our producers, along with water and carbon dioxide gas becoming sugar and leftover oxygen. So that's our photosynthesis.